As soon as you use the word IT, I'm switching off almost immediately. My sense on this is they've packaged up Waterfall.
If your alternative is complete chaos in software development, Waterfall looks like a good idea.
If you take the worst possible practices in the world, then yes, a practice that is merely bad practice is going to be better than that. What I'm picturing here is like a giant straw man flowing off Niagara Falls.
I think Waterfall is better than chaos.
As a firm believer in continuous delivery, I think Waterfall is chaos. Did you ship it? If you shipped it, then it probably wasn't Waterfall. The whole problem with software, and the reason it's different to like building a bridge, is you rarely know where the finish line is. Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by HeavyBit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders. Yeah, so this episode, I think, is going to be a very hateful episode, very ranty.
This is the Hateful Eight, the Quentin Tarantino of episodes.
It definitely going to be, and I think this happens when you're discussing something which comes from Gartner. I like Gartner. There's just a lot of legacy in how Gartner talks about producing software that a lot of it I don't agree with.
Yeah, so recently they came out with this report, and they're pushing a theory called, they came out with it in 2015, and it's called Bimodal IT.
Well, so as soon as you use the word IT, I'm switching off almost immediately.
And why do you switch off?
The word, it's sort of like community signaling. It's like if you talk about tech or software or engineering or something like that, you've got an understanding of like, it implies to me that you know how to build software.
Yeah.
And if you talk about IT, then I hear someone, holding the purse strings as a top-down CIO, ancient corporate thing, which of course is the world that Gartner lives in. So no wonder they're using the word IT all over the place.
Yeah.
But I don't think I know any engineers who would describe what they do as IT.
Well, I do think you have kind of a self-selecting sample because you live in San Francisco.
Deliberately so.
All right. So basically, Gartner's approach, which I disagree with, but I'll describe it, they basically tried to break up software development into two modes. And they called the one mode of IT more the systems of record. The big banks, the slow, the very, and I'll just read off how they described it. It's all about reliability. It's all about plan-driven. It's about things that are far from a customer. So basically like back-end systems.
Okay. And this is mode one?
Yeah, this is mode one.
Okay.
This is kind of, I'd call, and they say, think marathon runner, like kind of slow, steady, reliable. And the path two they describe as the Agile sprinter, which is more about continuous for new projects, for things that are very customer facing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the graph here or the chart, and it really seems like mode one is Waterfall and mode two is Agile, or at best, at a very close approximation.
So I think it's Gartner basically trying to break up the vendor landscape because that's what they do. They try to do.
Okay, so you can take a vendor and put it into mode one or mode two.
Yeah, and they're saying based on your project.
Gotcha.
Here's
I'm going to say, without any shame or fear of being wrong, but that if your CIO buys from a mode one vendor, quit now.
Quit now.
Like just... That's it. I'm walking out the door.
Well, so Jez Humble wrote a brilliant comeback, which I'll acknowledge right away because I'm a huge admirer of Jez Humble, where he's basically like, this is bullshit.
Okay. So I read his comeback and I agree that it is bullshit, but I think it's bullshit for different reasons than he thinks it's bullshit.
All right. Well, so let me summarize his just for those following at home. He basically said that this is bullshit because these two systems interact together. Like the argument that we have our back-end slow systems and our front-end fast systems so they could go on different paces is ridiculous because they need to talk to each other. Like if you're a bank and you're rolling out a new website, it needs to talk to a back-end system and you can't really iterate.
I mean, is this not microservices that we're talking about? You have two different services that operate at different paces. Is that not possible?
And he also said that the best companies like Toyota iterate on both axes at the same time.
Right. I noticed he mentioned Google and Amazon a whole lot. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can't say, okay, these systems are really slow and reliable and these are fast and agile. And that somehow we'll come up with a winning combination from this.
Right.
So-
Slow cannot be reliable in my...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so...
Well, I'll come to that. What else did Jess say?
Well, that's a summary, and I encourage everybody to go read his whole article.
Yeah,
Cause it was good.
It was quite good. My 12-second skim of it I was impressed. So my sense on this is that they've packaged up Waterfall into a best practice.
I think Waterfall is very comforting to some people because they think of Waterfall as a way in which they were more in control.
Right. So there's a lot of upfront planning and that sort of thing. I think people are more comfortable. I mean, there's something very seductive about the idea of we will spec it and it will be right, and then we will deliver that. I just don't think that it's good, realistic. Any sort of way to deliver software.
Yeah, I agree. But I think this is what Gartner is trying to say is that, like, hey, Agile seems very frightening. So when you said, oh, this is repackaged Waterfall, you say that like it's a bad thing.
Well, no, I do, because they're saying that it's valid to essentially what they're doing is they're allowing people who are stuck in the Waterfall world to be like, oh, Waterfall is perfectly valid. We'll have like 2 projects that do Agile and keep the majority of the company on.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's
so
perhaps as a migration path where eventually the people who think that die or retire, then yeah, maybe. But if they're actually presenting this, or if they actually believe the thing that they're saying, where this is a valid way of producing software, I think they're batshit.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, like, so the example they gave is Waterfall is more like a marathon runner, and Agile is a sprinter. I think as a marathon runner or as an ultra marathon runner, you have to be extremely agile when you're running. Mm-hmm. Like, you're constantly changing your plan.
Right.
You're constantly like, am I?
And that's when you know where the finish line is.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point with software and the whole problem with software and the reason it's different to like building a bridge or something like that is you rarely know where the finish line is.
Yeah, that's such a good metaphor. I mean,
but you don't even know what it means to have crossed
to be done.
It. Yeah.
I mean, like, so when you run a race, you at least know here's the end point.
Right.
How much food do I need?
You mostly you know the path as well, right? You've possibly run this race before.
Yeah, and I think with software, it's more like you don't know where the finish point is.
Right.
There is no finish point, in fact, because if you're successful, you'll be continuing to evolve.
Right.
Like Amazon started off as a bookseller.
Yep.
Now they sell cloud services.
Right.
If they'd said, hey, we're going to take this bimodal approach where like we have our steady book system and we're just going to iterate on the front end, they would never come up with AWS as which is where they actually make all their money.
And there's an interesting thing in this chart of like the culture is IT-centric, removed from the customer, versus in mode 2, it's business-centric, where it's close to the customer.
Yeah, which I think is ridiculous.
I mean, what crack are they smoking here? I mean, it's like they're saying that it's okay to have a mode in which you're removed from the customer.
Well, it's basically kind of a sop to the old world where it's like, hey, we release every 3 years and nothing changes. I heard a really interesting story from, do you know James Smith of Bugsnag?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he used to work at Bloomberg, and he said they had some pieces of Fortran that were mission critical, but yet nobody understood.
Of course not.
And so they literally could not.
I mean, as soon as you say it's mission critical, then no one's allowed to touch it, so no one will touch it, and so no one will understand it. Your bus factor goes down to 0. No one can.
So now they're kind of in this bad state because it's mission critical, but they cannot improve it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, nobody understands it.
Yeah.
So they took this mode 1 approach of like, hey, this part is done.
Yep.
And now they're kind of in this hole because it's written in Fortran.
Right.
Versus if you go more than mode 2 of let's always be improving, they would have iterated to a better language or better way.
You do end up in this situation sometimes, and I think that you do need a tactic to get out of it. I think it's not a particularly hard thing to do. You put an API in front of it, you try to build something else that matches the API, and then you feature flag your way into it. But I think anything where you're looking at long cycle times, where you're looking at fear of touching a component, anything where you're not constantly delivering the customer value and getting feedback from that value is just a disaster.
So what do you think are the pitfalls of that model?
It's one of those things where when you're doing a continuous delivery podcast and you have a continuous delivery company and you like live in this continuous continuous delivery mindset that it's been quite a few years since I've had to.
And you wear a continuous delivery T-shirt.
Right. I mean, the major pitfall is risk, right?
Yeah.
This is why we love continuous delivery. I'm sure we've talked about risk in every episode so far. If you have a long cycle time and you're going in the wrong direction, to go back to the race analogy, it'll be a long, long time before you discover that you're going in the wrong direction, and you may be unable to find your way back.
Yeah, or you could have just driven yourself off a cliff.
Right,
to go on the
exactly.
race, you could be like...
I mean, it's essentially what you're saying in this is we're going to close our eyes and drive according to the plan. And if the plan is wrong, or we don't actually know how to follow the plan...
Or there's not a car that we're in.
Exactly, yeah. There's an interesting thing here that they talk about approval-based. And this is kind of how I think about this world. It's like, do you have the phrase jobs worth? No, so it's a phrase you have in Ireland, you probably have it in England as well, but it's the idea is that you only do exactly what's in your job description.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like work to the hour.
Yeah. Work to rule,
Yeah.
all this sort of thing. And it's kind of like no one got fired for IBM or for buying IBM, right? You do something within your job to stay employed, but you actually don't give a shit about the project being delivered. You don't care about the company.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, exactly.
I built what you told me to build.
Exactly. And so when it says like plan-driven approvals based, it's like, all right, no one's getting fired for implementing this plan that has been approved, but everyone should be fired.
Yeah. Well,
for agreeing to go along with this. And
it goes back to something we talked about a long time ago. How much leeway does an individual have to say like this entire thing is kind of broken?
Yeah.
Like if you're at this big organization where it's like, okay, you do what the spec says to do, you do what the spec says.
Right.
And I think people are scared of mode 2.
Yeah, I mean, anything new is scary. I mean, the way that people deal with fear a lot of the time is they sort of clamp down on it, and they're like, they put approvals in front of it, and they're like, I want to see everything that comes out. And so when you move to Agile, and I'm going to use the Agile with a small a process, so like constantly changing what it is you're doing, you're constantly changing the direction you're in, you're pathfinding very effectively, but you're acknowledging that you don't actually know where you're going. I mean, yeah, it's scary times.
Yeah, I mean, it's
scary times until you've done it a few times. Once you've done a couple of cycles like this, nothing looks scary at all. It's scary to think that you could plan your future.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the whole thing about like, should a startup do a 5-year plan?
Right.
And I don't think they should do longer than a 3-month plan, to be honest. Like, you should have a 5-year vision.
Yes, yeah, a vision, definitely. Yeah.
But like, it's.
You could argue, and I think that this is actually quite a thing to do, is that you have, let's say, a 3-year plan or 2-year plan, let's say, and you redo it every month.
It seems like a lot of overhead.
Maybe every month is a bit often, but like you redo it as soon as you get feedback. So when I'm looking at what I want to do for my personal productivity, I have a month plan, a week plan, and a daily plan. And
on Tuesdays we do the podcast, right?
Yes, exactly. So I put in what I'm going to do this month or what I plan to have accomplished. And frequently halfway through the month, I'll realize that the things that I wrote at the start of the month will have been wrong. And so I redo the monthly plan.
Yeah, but I do think there's a big benefit in writing it down up front.
Yeah.
Like,
plans are worthless. Planning is essential.
Yeah, like so for a startup, like every month we talk about our big picture goals.
Yeah.
And then for every week we break it down. Like, here's what we're going to do this week. Yeah. And we're not blind.
Right. But all this is a very mode 2 thing in Gartner's thing. I don't think anyone would say like, first we will build the software, then we will QA the software, then we'll deliver the software, then we will hire the salespeople, then we will sell the software. I guess the engineers are twiddling their thumbs at this point.
Well, I do think there is something to, you staff to demand. You build an MVP and see if you can attract people to it. Mm-hmm. You do some marketing, see if your marketing is successful.
Right. You iterate, you use the feedback that you have to get somewhere. All fundamentally agile stuff.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if anyone on the left side of this, left side of the chart in the mode 1 thing, has any sense of using feedback in there to guide. I mean, you can't if by definition your cycle time is long.
Well, I think a classic example of this is healthcare.gov.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
the first version, not the second version.
The first version, which was very much like hey, let's build the system. Everything has to, and then we'll try to manage it all at a very large scale instead of, hey, let's try to break this down into the smallest chunks as possible to deliver value.
I think that the jobs worth thing that I was talking about becomes inevitably part of one of these large government IT contracts where you have someone, thousands of people executing the plan and getting paid, and no one can see the wood for the trees, possibly willfully.
Sometimes willfully, and sometimes even if they say it, they're branded as a troublemaker.
Yep. Whistleblower.
Yeah, shut up, code.
Yep.
Who cares if it, like the classic is the poor engineers of the NASA Challenger. So do you know Challenger?
Yeah, there was a shuttle accident. People died.
Yeah, so Feynman was one of my heroes, and he wrote a book because he was part of the investigation.
Right.
And basically, the engineers at the contractor are like, we cannot do this launch. It is colder than we've ever done a launch.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So they
and something shattered because of the cold. Was that right?
So they had an O-ring, which is basically an expansion joint. It's basically a piece of rubber that expands and contracts when the rocket is taking off.
Okay.
So what happened because it was so cold is rubber is brittle. And so that it couldn't contract properly.
Okay.
And so the engineers the night before, it was in Florida, it's like, it's colder than we've ever done a launch. We cannot do this.
Okay.
And they were just basically saying no. And then their superiors were like,
wow,
this is a long tangent.
So I saw a very good split between Mode 1 and Mode 2 recently. And this was in Jeff Bezos's, I think, annual shareholder talk about how we do things at Amazon, right? And so it's not the same Mode 1, Mode 2 as Gartner, but it's a very, very similar thing. And he split things into Mode 2, where we expect to fail a lot, and Mode 1, where failure is really not an option. So something where we give all the Kindles away to make it up on books. That's a Mode 1. You sit down, you do the plans, you do the financial models, you really work this out. And Mode 2 is we launch a fire. We don't get anywhere in the marketplace, fine. We do, amazing. And a lot of the successful things like Amazon Web Services, like Alexa, were all Mode 2 projects that they threw 10 things against the wall and one of them stuck, and then they quietly, or not so quietly because you're at Amazon scale that people complain when these things go away, but they killed 9 of them.
Yeah, but I think Jez Humble's point, and I think what you made before, is that even in Mode 1, you have to realize that failure is not an option, but failure can happen. And how do we how do we build a process against that?
I guess I'm misquoting and poorly paraphrasing Bezos to say failure is not an option. It's much more, there are some things that you need to do methodically and be very careful about. And these are very, very few and far between. And the vast majority of organizations proceed as if everything is a type 1 decision, when in fact the vast, vast majority are type 2.
Well, I think that's because a lot of organizations don't have a culture where failure is cool.
Right, exactly. But everyone there's inherently a tie between this, we can fail, and we're shipping with short cycle times, because really you can't fail when you have long cycle times.
Yeah, no. If every moonshot takes 3 years.
Yeah.
You can't fool around.
Right, and it becomes inevitable that when you start to have these really short cycle times, you see that the cost of failure is really low, and the benefit of trying things that might not be successful is really high. I guess that's where I'm drawing the analogy between Gartner's type 1 and type 2, or Mode 1 and Mode 2, and Bezos's type 1 and type 2.
Yeah.
They're fundamentally kind of concerned with the same thing, but one of them is just this throwback awful thing, and I think Bezos really nails how to think about those different projects.
Well, I think, so I'll sum up. I love your example of running because I like running. I think Mode 1 is more like everybody is Steve Jobs. They know the exact right direction to go in.
Right.
Versus, hey, none of us are Steve Jobs, and let's kind of wiggle our way in the right path and figure out if we're going the right path.
Right.
And by the way, even Steve Jobs was not Steve Jobs.
Right.
He had many very expensive mistakes.
Yeah. I think one of the most damaging things as well in the industry is people who think they're Steve Jobs.
Or
damaging to themselves.
Do people still think that?
It was a thing 3 or 4 years ago where everyone you talk to who was at least in sort of the startup-y part of the world would think they were Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I've never thought I was Steve Jobs. I've always, when I was fundraising, I think it was dinged a little bit because sometimes I would say stuff like, We have some marketing ideas, but we don't know which one is right.
Oh, I get right. They expect some sort of certainty. Right? And people find confidence to be very attractive, is a good word, but in the sort of the sort of thing you want your CEO to have is like confidence, and you feel a lot of confidence investing in someone who's confident,
And
even if it's ludicrous.
That's what I figured out. Like, and then I could put my say it much stronger. Like,
Right.
we think content marketing is going to work out. And it was the exact same thesis inside of this content marketing.
I had exactly the same thing. Like when I was going down for my raising Series A, and so I was going down to Sand Hill Road a lot, and I'm very much of the I don't know what's going to work. I don't know the right way. I'm sure we'll figure it out. We'll try things and we'll get there, and we'll work through our mistakes to get there.
Investors do not want to hear that.
Right. Exactly.
Investors do not want to hear that. They want to hear like, hey, we're going to do content marketing.
Exactly.
Here's our plan.
So what I did, and I remember this vividly, like I remember sitting in the parking lot in Kleiner Perkins at 8 a.m. I'm the only car in the car park, and I'm blasting "Lose Yourself" by Eminem as loud as I possibly can. I'm just sitting there, I'm fucking shouting, it's the way to instill the confidence that they expect you to have.
Yeah, it's funny because I got the exact same feedback, and I think it's because we're very similar. But it was like sit up straighter, be more authoritative.
Right.
And inside you could still be, because in my head I thought I was being very analytical. Mm-hmm. Like we have some strategies, we don't know which one is right, but we'll work through this. There's like, no, say you have strategies and that you're Eminem and you're gonna.
I mean, there is a this is quite a tangent, but there is a strong correlation between someone who can lead and someone who's like confident in their decisions. The pattern that giving VCs the benefit of the doubt here is that they're looking for someone who can, take a ragtag group of misfits and, lead them into battle and come out successful the other side. And many startups, that analogy kind of applies.
Well, that's very true. I mean, you're basically a squad leader.
Right.
So I'm a huge.
So you want to see that confidence from your squad leader.
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in DC, so I kind of grew up going to DC and seeing a lot of World War II movies. Mm-hmm. And there's this classic plot line of like, the leftover squad.
Yeah.
Who's actually like all have the A team, and you assemble them to something that's stronger than all the parts, and you lead them to victory.
And the leader gets starts out a little bit tough. No one really likes him, but then he manages to pull a vision together when they get trapped behind enemy lines. And
it's basically also the plot of Star Wars, by the way.
Who's the leader?
Well, that you can. I would say it's Princess Leia.
No, I think that's probably right. All right, so Star Wars good, Gartner bad. Is that our conclusion?
I think Gartner is good in that.
No, I actually think it is as well. I'm being a little bit facetious here. I want to walk back on that last thing.
I think there's still a fair amount of fear around what Agile really means in terms of control, and I think Gartner.
It's only been around like 12 or 13 years at this point. So I expect that people would still fear it.
I don't know if you're being facetious or not.
That's facetious.
So Gartner's message right here is fine for your, young, risky projects. Go off and do this fresh new thing, Agile.
Right. So no matter what, I think don't listen to Gartner on this. Every project is a type 2 project. The risk is lower. Long cycle times kill you. Even if you're on the piece of Fortran that no one can touch, like you can continuously deliver your way out of that far better than you can do a mode 1 project out of it. Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by HeavyBit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about HeavyBit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.